Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been described as a philosopher of education, an administrator and an activist. He had 35 years distinguished service in the Indian Administrative Service. Much of that time was spent in the field of education. He retired in 1992 to take that experience to the grassroots. He established himself and sent out a reputation, created a reputation for himself for his work pioneering and innovative with Lok Jumbish in Rajasthan, and he today heads as a chairperson the Foundation for Education and Development. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Anil Bordia.
Thank you very much.
Long distinguished career in the administrative service, and you then sort of switch from that macro grand scale of working to the micro in Rajasthan. What prompted that? Were there sort of frustrations at the things that you wanted to do and didn't manage to do in the administrative service?
Yes, both. When one retires, one looks forward to doing something worthwhile even after retirement. So this opportunity became available to me, and Lok Jumbish was a program which I had contributed in preparing, in drafting the program and in having discussions. And when I was called upon to serve as chairperson of the governing body of Lok Jumbish, I was absolutely delighted.
So what was its sort of unique agenda that the sort of the macro level management of education wasn't able to achieve, and so it needed that kind of grassroots effort?
Right. I think you have really put your finger on the thing which is really most important. I would say that there were four important things in Lok Jumbish to which I would like to make a mention. One is that we created a system in which education was demanded by the community. Education was asked for by students and by teachers. So rather than being a supply-driven education, this was a demand-driven education. Secondly, we recognized that in order to increase participation of girls and to make girls into active learners rather than just passive presence in the classrooms, you needed to change the community's perception about the role of women in society. Rather than thinking that they have to go to their in-laws' place, they have to look after the children and look after parents-in-law and husband and so on, for women to be active participants in economy, active participants in society. This is the kind of change which we try to bring through Lok Jumbish. And thirdly, the question of quality of education. We came to the conclusion that for universalization of primary education, the most important factor is quality of education. And quality of education was seen not only as improvement in levels of learning of, let's say, Hindi and mathematics, but in reality an overall development of a person's understanding of society and understanding of the environment and things of that kind. And lastly, we were able to create a system of monitoring, a system of accountability in which we could monitor the progress of every child, whether a child is in school or a child is dropping out, whether the school is functioning properly. So this system of accountability made it possible for us to ensure that not only were the levels of enrollment improved very considerably, but the levels of dropout of children, which is the bane of Indian education, primary education system, these were reduced to a level of about 20% as against about 50% in North Indian states.
Well, I think that your articulation really reflects the aspirations of any national education policy. Why do you think as a national policy this has failed, whereas you were so obviously able to make it happen in the context of this, well, relatively micro movement when you were no longer a bureaucrat? Why weren't you able to achieve this as the IAS officer, Secretary Education, making it happen in all of India? And that's really the aspiration, isn't
well,
it?
when we were working on education policy back in 1985-86, we thought that we could bring about a change in the whole country. And therefore, many of these ideas were built into the education policy of 1986. In reality, no real change has taken place in this policy, unfortunately.
Do you experience a sense of failure in that? You were pivotal in the formulation of the policy.
Yes. When you make policy in India, you have to recognize that this policy is going to be implemented by hundreds and thousands of people, over whom the central government does not have, cannot have, and must not have any control. These are the decisions which are made at the level of the state, at the level of the district, and at the level of village, and at the level of the school. Now, if these decisions have to be made at that level, there's very limited contribution which the central government can make to the whole system. And unfortunately, our whole system of education in our country is such that it lacks rigor. It is not willing to make that change, make that kind of investment, create that kind of accountability which will ensure that children get an education which is satisfactory, which will build their future, and which will sort of really bring out their potential.
Would you then say that you now feel that macro management approach to education really needs to yield to a more micro accountability, micro initiatives such as what you've been working on?
Well, there have to be both in reality. You do need at the macro level certain policies, certain decisions regarding investment of money, some decisions regarding what kind of schools would there be.
So what are some of the key macro decisions that you feel you would now like to see with 35 years behind you, 10 plus years in the field, at the grassroots? What would you recommend now?
Well, I would say first and foremost, and probably saying this is saying everything, and that is to pay attention to quality of education. We have lived for too long in our country with a minimalist approach, that if you cannot provide 5 teachers in a primary school, provide 2. If you cannot provide 2, provide just 1. If you cannot provide a qualified, educated teacher, provide whoever is available in the village. Now, this is the kind of an approach which people have sort of accepted in our country in the last 50 years or so. Now, the most important thing is to bring about a change in this. To create schools which would be which would have enough classrooms, enough teachers, and enough learning material, a place which children would enjoy going to. I think that this has implications for teachers, for teacher training. This has implications for the investment of education, investment in education. This has implications for management of education and everything.
Much of this is sort of fairly familiar. It's what we would all aspire for, but it isn't happening. And I was reading a report of an article that you'd written, complaining and moaning the fact that even during elections, the question of education wasn't on the agenda, wasn't a burning issue, and you would imagine that it would be. Why isn't it so?
I think that the reason is, I would say, it's dialectical, in the sense that those who live what is called the enclave India, who have access to the best type of education, those who have access to the best type of healthcare, etc., they really are not bothered. They do not care what kind of education vast masses of people in our country get. Therefore, you have literacy levels which are so low that they do not impact the lives of people. You have primary education system which does not provide any real education, and most people are not bothered about it, and most people are not willing to raise a hue and cry about it. Even in the right to education, the law which is being prepared to give effect to the right to education, it speaks of a minimalist approach, just 1 or 2 teachers in a classroom, some kind of a vague, unsatisfactory, non-formal education, and things of this kind. I think that we really have to reject all these things in a very resolute manner, and to ask for an education system which provides at least 1 teacher for every classroom, and an education up to grade 8 for every child. I think that this is the kind of system we have to go for.
We'll come back to that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with Mr. Anil Bordia, educational activist, philosopher, and administrator. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Anil Bordia. We were talking about the demand pull for education, and why at election time, these things are not happening. You mentioned that it's really the elites and they don't care because the pyramid of education is so narrow upwards, and the elites get a wonderful education, world class, but the base of the pyramid is being ignored. But why aren't the people from the base of the pyramid calling out and demanding a good quality education, even if not a good quality education in a philosophical sense, but in terms of the ability to earn livelihood, to be able to assert their rights? Education is a human right. Why isn't that happening?
Well, education as a human right is something which is recognized all over the world. It is now also recognized in our country because education has been accepted as a fundamental right. But people really, in fact, have no voice. That is the reason why the Employment Guarantee Bill is so lukewarm, so unsatisfactory. That is the reason why the law to give effect to the fundamental right to education is going to provide the same minimalist approach. That is the reason why the programs which are meant for poverty alleviation do not really reach the poorest people. This is the whole situation in our country which prevents benefits really percolating to the Dalits, percolating to women, percolating to the most deprived. And I think that that there really has to be a real movement for bringing about a fundamental change in the whole educational situation. And this is the kind of thing which I was trying to do in Lok Jumbish, which extended to nearly 1/3 of the state of Rajasthan, and where people were really, parents of the children and the village community was really willing to stand up to defend that program when an effort was being made to sort of wind it up.
Well, in fact, an effort that was not entirely unsuccessful in some ways.
Yes, there was an effort to wind it up, but then when they saw that thousands of people were walking on the streets of Jaipur to ask for continuance of Lok Jumbish was continued, and there was intervention from the central authorities, and the program really sustained, and I think that it presents a kind of an example which can be emulated in other parts of the country.
Maybe we should, we could look briefly at the other aspect that you've been writing and talking a great deal about, and that is the quality of education, not just the quantity, not just the fact that we can have schools, we can have place teachers, we can give them blackboards, but yet there is something more than that that education seeks. So as this philosopher of education, what is a quality education?
Well, quality education, firstly, is an opportunity for children to be able to learn and to learn to learn. Also, a program of learning, or to say a curriculum, which goes well beyond scholastic achievements, which takes into account the attitudes of people, the values of people, children's morality and issues of ethics, and the kind of society which we are going to build in future. The kind of education which is provided at present is to sustain the existing caste and class system. If we want to bring about a change in the society, there will have to be a very different kind of education.
This element of value education has been controversial, both in terms of the implicit values that it was perceived would be cultivated, and this was with Mr. Murli Manohar Joshi and the previous government when they began to sort of bring about this emphasis on it. And the second element was the technique of imparting values. To really look at both these issues, what are the values that we're seeking to cultivate and inculcate in young people? And you'd mentioned in our conversation prior to this, you'd mentioned this idea of dharma. Now, it was dharma, perhaps a variation of it as you and I might understand, that Mr. Joshi's government was seeking to have percolate through the education system. So how do you understand dharma?
Well, what Mr. Joshi's government was thinking of dharma was Hindutva. Very frankly and very categorically just that.
So what is your notion of dharma?
My notion of dharma is a way of life. a way of life which acknowledges responsibility, which acknowledges duty, which acknowledges maryada, which creates a system of learning where people look at themselves, nature, other people in harmony, as they cherish diversity. They think that diversity is beautiful, and to develop an attitude which is best symbolized in Hindi word sahishnata. Now that's the kind of thing which is the kind of dharma that I am talking about.
Well, that was also a strategy that sought to make value education a part of the curricula. Can it be taught as sort of, you know, a subject matter of books and curricula? How do you go about cultivating this?
It can perhaps be taught, but I hope that that no attempt would be made to teach morality or to teach ethics. I hope that we would at some stage have a community of teachers who would symbolize what the children should learn about. Ideally, the children should learn about these things from their infancy at home, but and also television and other means of communication should make a contribution towards creating a situation where children acquire a basic understanding, fundamental understanding of what dharma means. Dharma in the traditional sense, which includes which is the same in Islam, which is the same in Hinduism.
But isn't the very use of the word dharma likely to make sort of minorities uncomfortable? It's so obviously a Hindu word in that sense. You know, of course, open to the sort of the liberal interpretation of the Hindu worldview of dharma, it makes it secular. But inherently, it's loaded.
It's not a Hindu word; it's a Sanskrit word, and there are absolutely identical interpretations of this word in Islam, in Judaism, in Christianity, and everywhere. We can choose the word which is acceptable. But when you are talking of values, the values which I would like to plead for are the values which are enshrined in the preamble of our Constitution. Secularism is at this time a word which has become controversial, which is a shame, because I think that if by secularism, if we mean that the state should not take any side in respect of any particular religion, or state should distance itself from religion. I think that secularism, equality, democratic values, these are the kinds of things which one is talking about, and these things should really be built into the system of education, and people should really children should really live it when they are in school, and at home.
We'll be right back after a short break with this continuing conversation with Anil Bordia, educationist, philosopher, activist. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Anil Bordia. Looking again briefly at this, because I believe that the process of transformation that education is seeking to yield and bring about is beyond the notion of just sort of, you know, teaching it and telling people that, you know, you need to be moral, you need to be secular, or whatever it is. You know, intellectually I might realize, I might be aware that it's wrong to be angry, it's you know, consumerism, it may not be such a good idea after all, but that doesn't necessarily lead to transformation. I've been very interested in the fact that in many of the programs and projects that you have initiated, you have looked at other techniques, transformational techniques, of vipassana, of prekshna meditation, of yoga. What place do you see these having and maintaining in the education system?
Well, we were very successful in Lok Jumbish. We recognized the fact that you cannot bring about a change in the educational system unless the teachers changed. And to bring about change in teachers, ordinary routine kinds of teacher training were of no avail. So we established negotiations with people who were conducting good quality yoga courses, vipassana courses, and Preksha Dhyan, the Jain system of meditation and self-improvement. And we sent a fairly large number of teachers for these courses. And when the teachers came back, almost all of them came back with a different perception about themselves, different image for themselves, different visualization of their own role, and the way in which they were working. For example, teacher absenteeism, which is one of the greatest problems in our education system, almost disappeared. The way in which children behaved with, the way in which teachers behaved with children, that got transformed. Their sense of their whole role in the school, it got changed. And I think that this was one of the very important investment which was made in bringing about a change among the teachers. And all teachers, Jain and Muslim teachers went for yoga, and so religion was not a factor at all. And none of these systems of meditation and self-improvement really have anything to do with the religions with which they are associated. So I think that this is one of the kinds of things which can be done and ought to be done if we want to create schools where children will learn to be different persons, better persons, more humane persons.
What has all this engaging in education over a lifetime done to Anil Bordia, the individual?
Well,
what about
one thing is that even in old age, I recognize that I cannot sit still. I'm now associated with a program called Doordarshan, which is a program for persons in the 11 to 20 age group of their lives, and it is fascinating the way in which we can bring about a change among the young persons in this age group, boys and girls. So I think what my long association with education has done is to sort of give me a sense of humility, to recognize and understand that there is only this much, not an enormous amount, this much which you can do, but you have a duty to do something, and you really must do it. Otherwise,
is that sort of the wisdom of hindsight that you would give bureaucrats manning, and then politicians for that matter, running ministries with thousands of crores?
Well, I don't know whether I want to give any advice to anybody. What I do want to say is that whatever people believe in, and I hope that they believe in something which harmonizes people, which creates a well-being for everyone, not create any kind of distrust, kind of hate, kind of these kinds of factors, but something which really makes people to live a better life, helps others to live a better life. I hope that everyone will think about it, and that they will do something to move in that direction. This is a difficult direction to move in, but I think that if people make up their mind, they can do it.
Given the fact that bureaucracy or being bureaucratic is implicitly a derogatory word and a derogatory notion, and you were that for 35 years, what flag can you hold up for the bureaucracy in its capacity to impact and make a difference, not just its potential, but in practice? Aren't you frustrated when you run your sort of NGOs and you do these sort of innovative pioneering work and at the grassroots, and now your interface with the bureaucracy?
Well, one of the things I would say is for bureaucracy to not, particularly the Indian Administrative Service, not to take over everything. Leave education to people who understand education, who have practiced education in a very direct manner. Leave, for example, several other areas. So creating space for others, creating rather than sort of going and sort of taking over things, and to assume that you can do everything better than anybody else can do. I think that this is disastrous. This really must change. And I don't see that happen in the very near future, but I'm sure that this will happen eventually.
What do you think the impact on education will be of the huge influx of private enterprise, both out of indigenous initiatives and globalization? Particularly to this notion of dharma that you were talking about.
Well, at this time, the impact will be unfortunate. It is unfortunate as one sees it in practice, because what one sees is that the division between the well-to-do and the poor and people who do not have access to resources is widening. Things are becoming more esoteric, more exclusive for people. I think that we really need to create a system which is genuinely inclusive, where whether the person has physical disability or whether a person is from poor background, whether it is a boy or a girl, everyone really ought to be able to have access to education of satisfactory quality. That's the bottom line. And unfortunately, what is happening at this time is the opposite of that. So I think that to everyone, we really need a new education policy. We need to think about the developments which have taken place in the last 15, 20 years to come up with an education policy which really is an education policy for the future of this country, which takes into account the vast changes in science and technology, in education, in understanding in the lives of people that have taken place.
And what role does Anil Bordia see for himself in that? You still have so much energy, vitality, and you're going great guns.
Well, I would be prepared to submit my memorandum if such an exercise is undertaken, and make myself available for anything that becomes necessary. But basically, I expect to be able to set examples, give examples of a few ways in which things can be done.
And practice what you preach.
And hopefully practice what I preach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bordia. This has been a great show.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.